Hey everyone, David here, and I've got some exciting news to share. I've decided to write a book, and I've entitled it Psychosocial Hazards Are Real. The book is intended to help clarify the fact that psychological safety cannot be achieved without paying attention to the psychosocial hazards people are being exposed to. Despite how much individuals might be interested in treating others with kindness, dignity, and respect, many cultures are so full of psychosocial traps that no psychological health and safety effort can ultimately succeed. But to address psychosocial hazards, you first have to know what they are, and you have to have some idea what to do to address them. Though the book won't be 100% complete until the spring of 2025, I'd like to share a unique opportunity to reserve a copy during the book presale campaign. The campaign will run from September 16th to October 18th, 2024. This will be an opportunity to get one of the first copies of the book, tickets to the book launch event, and other opportunities to learn more about psychosocial hazards. For more information, you can go to my personal LinkedIn or Facebook page, or the LinkedIn, Facebook, or webpage for ID2 Solutions. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity. Now, back to this episode of the podcast. There's little doubt that one of the most psychologically challenging occupations in the United States is serving as one of the 1.2 million firefighters. In recent years, the mental health of firefighters has become a greater priority for the industry and the communities that they serve. We'll talk with a member of an association established to address psychology in the fire rescue service. Up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each week, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk psychological health and safety. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. So firefighters face significant psychological challenges due to the nature of their work, including PTSD from exposure to traumatic events, depression and anxiety from a high-stress environment, and burnout from physical and emotional demands. Substance abuse can sometimes arise as a coping mechanism, further affecting mental health. Irregular hours often lead to sleep problems. Witnessing tragic events can result in grief and loss. Moreover, there's a stigma around seeking mental health support within the firefighting community, which can prevent individuals from getting the help that they actually need. Comprehensive psychological support and awareness are crucial for addressing these challenges. An organization has been found to bridge the gap between the psychology community and the fire rescue service, and I have the honor of chatting with someone who's helping bridge that gap, who's got a lived experience in the fire rescue service and is helping translate what goes on in a fire station to folks who are interested in the psychological, mental, and emotional health of those who actually do the work today. So we're going to get into it and dive right into it. But the way that I do that is by having an introduction of my guest by my guest. So in this case, the question to get us started is, who is Robert Avsec?
Well, one owner, low mileage. One owner, low mileage. I served with the men and women of the Chesterfield, Virginia Fire and EMS Department. Retired there in December of 2007 as a battalion chief paramedic. I was a paramedic my whole career, even as I advanced through the ranks, and did everything. did everything in the department. I think I added up one time. Out of 26 years, I spent a cumulative 9.5 years on staff assignments. I was director of EMS. I was director of our training and safety committee academy. Um, got detailed for 2.5 years to co-manage our emergency communications center, which is in Chesterfield County is the all public safety, law enforcement, fire, EMS, sheriff's department. So I like to think that I got a very broad background, not just in the fire service, but particularly how all of those public safety agencies either can work together or perhaps sometimes don't work together as well as they should. Um, for since 2012, I've been a freelance writer. I've written over 500 articles for Fire Rescue One, their online magazine, EMS One, which is another one of their publications, and have my own blog, Talking Shop, for Fire and EMS, where kind of look at all sorts of issues that are going on in the fire service. And it was through that work that I wrote a couple of articles early on. When I retired in 2007, neither firefighter cancer nor firefighter mental health was even on the radar. Okay, we we were still working to get people to wear their air packs all the time, right? Right? And so I heard about this organization, Fire Service Psychology Association, and I'm the kind of guy, if I see something that interests me, particularly these days now where you can find anything on the web, on the internet, and so I contacted and got to know Dr. Kristen Weldon. And Dr. Weldon is a licensed psychologist in South Pasadena, California. She founded FSPA, Fire Service Psychology Association, back in 2017. And as you said in the introduction, our slogan is we're working to bring those two communities together. I put the bridge over a river. There's this river that is keeping us apart at the moment. We got the fire service on one side of the river that's going, oh, we got all this stuff, all those things that you mentioned in the going on in the fire service, and we got the on the other side of the river, you got the psychology community, which is not just psychologists. You got your psychologists, you got your mental master's level clinicians like your licensed family counselors, marriage and family therapists, etc. Right? And as I talk more and more with firefighters, I tell them psychology is like a toolbox, right? And part of if you're gonna use the toolbox, you got to learn what tool works for what problem, right? Because otherwise, every problem's a nail,
Right.
and every solution is a hammer, and
Right.
and we know that doesn't work, right? So I got really involved with the association. Today we probably have, out of our 200 members, about a little over half are psychologists. About another third are those master's level clinicians. And then we've got fire service leaders. We got firefighters. Right now, we've got 12 psychology student members, people who are either working to get their master's level certification or moving towards getting their doctorate in the field of psychology. And so that's where my involvement began. I like to think of myself as a advocate with a capital A, because I like right here, if somebody gives me an opportunity to talk about this, it's very important that we're talking to both sides of the river. Okay, we're talking to both sides of the river so that psychologists, we know there's a dearth of psychologists and master's level clinicians who understand the fire service. Okay, they don't understand or they don't know. It's not that they don't understand, they're just not informed and educated about things like the work schedule. My favorite paragraph is we need more psychologists who know what firefighters do, why they do it, how they do it, the conditions under which they do it, and what are those unique stressors that you're going to encounter working with a firefighter that you don't encounter with a school teacher or an accountant or anybody else who needs your services as a mental health professional. And then, you spoke in your introduction about the stigma that exists in the fire service. You, you know, I'm a firm believer that we're making progress on eroding that. Okay, but the thing is, though, we're still talking at the high level. Okay, we're still talking about, here we are in 2025, and if we've still got firefighters who don't understand that there's a mental health issue going on, then that in itself is a problem. Okay, but the other thing is that, and what concerns me greatly, all right, and I'm the fire service guy in these discussions with my psychology associates, is that we've got a lot of people and a lot of organizations in the fire service who are working on this problem, but they're not getting the psychology perspective. They're not taking advantage of the knowledge, skills, and abilities that a psychologist brings to. There's so much emphasis on intervention, rightly so, okay? But another one of my favorite quotes is from Bishop Desmond Tutu. Says, if we're constantly pulling people out of the river, perhaps we should go upstream and find out why they're falling in.
Right. Right.
Right?
Right. Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
I think there's so much emphasis on intervention, but there again, if we look at our fire service culture, how much have we ever put towards fire prevention? Okay, when I tell people in the psychology community, the average fire department devotes less than 1% of their operating budget to fire prevention and public education. Okay, so if that's your model over here in the fire service, right, that you spend the bulk of your time and energy and resources on response, well, that means that you've got a response psyche. And so now when we're asking that, well, hey, we got to develop things to keep people from having these mental health challenges, right? It's hard to do that when the only thing is response.
I, Robert, I gotta say, well, so two things. First thing is, I want to ask you one other question that I ask everybody who comes on, and have you opine on that for just a second, and then we'll get back into this because you're bringing up such an interesting point about our focus on responding to things versus preventing things. So before we go there, so what does psychological health and safety, when you hear that, what does that mean to you?
To me, that's another term that you hear an awful lot about is psychological safety. Okay, and when you ask people, well, what does that mean? They say, I don't know. Well, it starts with people within your organization, people being able to say, I think, or I got this idea, and not immediately being, oh no, that'll never work, right? Sounds simple, right? but also the ability to, we always talk about on the fire ground that, if you see something unsafe, you got to say something, right? You got to speak up, right? I mean, that was one of the big things that I always emphasized when I was part of any instructional program talking about ICS and emergency management, etc. Okay, well, it's very nice to say that, but if your people don't believe that, it's not going to happen. And unfortunately, we continue to see events that unfold with a really bad outcome. And like with any good train wreck, there's a lot of places along the way where that could have been interrupted. Okay, I don't know if you've ever seen the Swiss cheese model for risk management. Okay, I mean the fire service exemplifies that, right? Right, and so you know, to me, that's the part of the preventive aspect of psychological care for firefighters is number one, if you ever want them to be comfortable asking for help from somebody outside the department, they got to be accustomed to asking for help or giving help within the organization that they live and work every day. And to me, what's the word on it? That's the silver bullet. That's the silver bullet right there. If you're a fire chief and you want to be taking better care of your people, well, you've got to start with people being able to say, "I'm uncomfortable with that," or "I don't agree with that," and not being ostracized.
That's right. So I'll go even further to say, because there are some I have folks from you name it industry to talk on this podcast about this topic. Okay. And when people get into very specific conversations about their industry, what other people sometimes will go, oh yeah, that's only them. Well, what I'm finding out is the same thing that goes on in the fire service goes on in construction. It goes on in consulting companies. It goes on in local government. It goes on in banking. It goes on everywhere because this is human stuff. It's human stuff. And if you want to do a better job for any customer, no matter what your service is, no matter what you provide, how in the world can you be better for people outside of the system than you are for people inside the system? How can you, if you treat people that you see every single day aggressively, you don't listen, you got this kind of, there's nothing wrong with competition, but competition that is, I need to hurt Robert so I can look good. That kind of mentality will carry over into your business dealings, into your dealing with the public, because it's all about competition and all that type of thing. It's got to be about human beings. If we're going to do things with human beings, how do we create an environment so those human beings can bring their best to the conversation? We can say all we want. Oh, say something, see something. It's not that they couldn't say it. They're looking at what happens after they say it. So you said something, but what do you do after people bring things up?
To quote Chief Brunacini again, another one of my go-to guys, right? Can't do great external customer service until you're doing great internal customer service. That was the whole basis behind the Mrs. Smith book, right? And I think you saw that. I know when I first had the opportunities at the National Fire Academy to be in classes with people from Phoenix, right? And the first question people always asked people from Phoenix at that time anyway was, how much of that's real and how much of it's BS? And to a person, they would say, what you see is what you get. What you see is what you get. Okay? The I never forget one of the stories one of the guys told me in at the academy was, he says, when Chief Brunacini was really focused on getting us to slow down, right? Quit driving so damn fast. Okay, he said one day we're going to a call and there's Chief Brunacini standing on the side of the road with a hair dryer,
I
right?
call that. Yeah.
And he said, you know what? We slowed down.
Right. Right.
We slowed down, right? He didn't write another policy. He didn't write another memo or whatever. He got out there on the side of the road with a hairdryer going, and it had an influence. It had an influence. So I think that you know, if you can be developing the greatest program for your firefighters and their mental health, right? But if over here you're constantly beating them up, okay? Battalion Chief Dina Alley down in Raleigh, okay? Had an opportunity to meet with her, to talk with her, you know, and to hear and see the thing that she's writing about. And it was year before last. It was Council of Governments, DC Council of Governments firefighter safety thing. It was the big guy behind that is Sean Downs, Deputy Chief Sean Downs, Washington Fire and EMS, and Dina threw up. You know, these. This is what the research is showing, folks. That what little research we've gotten so far on this, right? PTSD was number 6. You know what was number 1? The department I work for.
Right.
The department I work for. Right? You know, whether it's you know, the age old those people writing another policy that don't know what's going on in the street, right? Well, that's when something like that happens, okay? That's another nick.
That's right.
That's another nick, okay? And you know, it's I heard a psychologist talk at one time about, you know, suicide. Okay? Most suicides aren't the result of somebody got their arm cut off. Okay? It's those 1,000 nicks that eventually has such a negative impact on your psyche that you know what? This temporary problem needs a permanent solution. You know? And so, you know, whether it's policies that don't make sense, whether it's you know, unfair discipline issues, work schedules. Why are we still working 24-hour shifts? Well, I wrote a piece back in like 2012 on my blog, you know, talking about you talk about self-inflicted injury, okay? You know, when I read the research that came out after Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and other big events like that, right? And you find that, you know, when did most of these problems happen? Midnight shift. At the end of the midnight shift, right? And then you read, you know, the physiology that says once you've been up for 18 hours, your cognitive ability is right around what it would be after you've had 2 drinks. Okay, well, all we got to do is go back and look at past fire accidents, all right? The one that vividly stands out to me is, you know, the crew that got a call at 2:00 in the morning, right? And they leave the fire station in the ambulance, and a mile down the road they crash into a telephone pole, and the driver never recalls getting out of bed.
Right. Yeah, it is.
He got up. He got down to the ambulance. He
Autopilot.
Out the street and right. So is that really the person you want calculating a drug dosage at 3 a.m? Is that really the person that you want determining whether firefighters stay in a building or come out of a building? You know, so but now, you know, and when I see departments that are going to, you know, 48 hours and then 4 days off. Oh, the 4 days off is great.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So I want to dig into, because we're off on this topic. I want to suggest though that the schedule isn't even the issue. It's the focus on the wrong thing. So something happens and we go, well, let's change the schedule. Let's buy a different truck. But what we rarely do, and this is not just in the fire service, what we rarely do is try to figure out what was going on with a human being at that point and how can we change that environment. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good or a bad schedule, but what was the person doing on the schedule? How many events did they have in advance? If they had nothing going on and had slept, 12 hours before, maybe it's not that big of a deal. And we really lack
Human
the kinds of
factors.
systems.
Human
The
human factor analysis. In fact, Dr. Weldon and Dr. Burt Clark, who's another one of our members, okay, just finished last week doing a course on human factors in a variety of industries, okay? And, recent events aside, okay, how did the airline industry become so accident-free? They went back and they looked at the human factors, and out of that came cockpit resource management. But there again, okay, it wasn't a procedure or policies or whatever. It was, we got to get past this idea that the captain's opinion is the only opinion that matters.
Exactly. That's
okay?
right.
Because
That's
when
right.
you got
That's
it,
right.
Going back into the Sioux City, Iowa crash, where this was back like the late 80s, right? And the plane is circling and circling and circling, right? Because a light doesn't go green on the board like it's supposed to, right? And the rest of the crew's going, Captain, we're getting close to running out of gas. Okay, I'm sorry, that's not the Sioux City. Sioux City was a success story. It was one before that. But anyway, an airliner crashed because it ran out of gas. Okay, and it was things like that led the FAA and the psychology community, right, to come together and say, why is this happening? What, even going back to Air Florida. Okay, the Air Florida crash in 1980. Listen to that cockpit transcript, right? They're sitting at the terminal. They've been de-iced, right? But now there's another delay, and the first officer is looking out the window, and this is what he's saying to the captain. Boy, I think it's icing up out there a little bit, right? Oh, like 4 or 5 times he says something similar to that, trying to give the non-aggressive cue to the captain that, you know what, we need to de-ice again. And then off they go. They crash into the 14th Street Bridge.
Right. Well, again, that example highlights for me the importance of each human being able to do hazard assessment. Because so no one experiences harm without exposure to a hazard. The harm comes from a hazard, and what that hazard is depends. And if you don't recognize that it's even there, now this is the discussion I have in my book. I talk about the fact that there are psychosocial hazards or non-physical hazards that exist everywhere all the time, and I might have a different list than you do. And because, well, Robert's just that old firefighter guy. He doesn't know anything about this. But hold it. It doesn't matter what he used to do. The question is, Has he identified a hazard that can harm him or harm us? That's it. And then figure out what to do about it. But the issue is a lot of times it's the lack of recognition because, well, I don't get to talk or I'm not paying attention or the hazard is there. And if you don't recognize it, you're not going to do anything about it. Or you'll skip over it and go to something that you do recognize. There are lots and lots of these scenarios. Again, we'll go back to the one you were talking about earlier. Well, let's just go change the schedule. Well, okay, if you change the schedule and have people exposed to the same kinds of lack of sleep and too many calls and bad brakes on the vehicle, and if you don't address the hazard, whatever the hazard is, you're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's still going to sink because you haven't recognized that there's an iceberg out there.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that comes to my mind, particularly when it comes to firefighters, is how many times have we seen accidents involving apparatus that should have never been in service
In the first
in
place.
the first place? Okay, because the people riding on it said, "This thing, it's got no brakes. It's got no brakes." Okay, but there's that pressure, right? Oh, we got to keep it in service, right? Because I don't want the ramifications to come down on me if I say no. We're not moving. We're not moving till this gets fixed, right? The negative consequences for me, it's just not worth it. Okay, but I guarantee it. But again, I can't speak to the current climate. But back in the day, I know in Chief Brunacini's department, if an engineer said, "I ain't driving this thing until they fix that," there'd have been somebody from the maintenance shop there like that, or there'd have been a tow truck pulling up out front.
That's it. Exactly. It's about priorities. It's about priorities. And again, if the priority is always somebody other than the person closest to you, there's always going to be an issue. How can I go out? And again, we're talking about fire trucks and firefighters and, going on ambulances, all that type of thing. But the same thing applies to people who sell cars. If you treat, or I'll make it even more, people who provide our groceries. If that person at the cash register at the local supermarket is being treated like trash today, why is it that you're surprised when they yell at a customer who comes through? Why are you surprised that the mechanic who's working on our car missed that thing because their boss was yelling at them and treating them like trash? How can we expect to give better service to the ultimate customer when we can't give better service to the immediate customer? And the immediate customer is the human being who's expected to do that thing. They ought to be able to do it safely and not get injured either physically or emotionally. That shouldn't happen. That should be our priority.
You're absolutely.
Should be a real
I
priority.
couldn't agree more, and that's why I say I am such an advocate with a capital A. All right. Also, it's how my last name begins. But such an advocate of, hey, we're not talking about the psychology community coming in here and telling you how to run your fire department. What we are saying is, let's bring in the psychology community so that you and your people can start to better understand, why do we do what we do? Why do we treat each other like that? Where is this coming from? How do we remove those barriers? Okay, I never forget a great quote I heard one time from it was one of my supervisors who came back to the comm center after we had sent her to some leadership training. She came back and she was sitting down with me, and I was asking her, "Tell me about your experience. What did you learn?" She said at that time I was a captain. She said, "Captain, I got to be honest with you. I don't remember a whole bunch of stuff, but I do remember one thing. And that is, my job as a supervisor is to remove barriers."
There we go.
Winner, chicken dinner. right?
Absolutely.
I told her, I said, I don't care that you don't remember anything else. I said, but if you can live that, if you can go out there on that comm center floor and work like that with your people, then then I've gotten all the return on investment I need.
That's exactly right. Unfortunately, there are some who, and often it's because of how they were treated, how they were value culture, how they were trained. They think just the opposite, that my job is to create as many barriers as possible. Or my job when I go to this meeting is to say no all the time to everything. And then you wonder, A, why things don't work or why people don't want to participate. It's because does it always have to be? No. The only time here's again, this is an opinion on mine. And I've been this way. I was got my first supervisor job. I was in my late 20s. So I really didn't necessarily know what I was doing. Didn't have any classes. I just kind of picked it up on my own. But from a safety perspective, I was willing to take whatever it was. The first person that I ever initiated disciplinary action on was not because of some, other, it was because they failed to wear their seatbelt after me directing them to do it a number of times. It was that. All the other stuff, I don't care. Who cares whether you show up a little late? I mean, it's a few minutes. What does that matter? That's not going to kill anybody. We can get on the truck with somebody else. But you have to wear your seatbelt. And the reason it was important to me is I had a crew member, a person that I work with, who fell off the back of a fire truck when I was in my late 20s. So that stuck with me. And that was only a few years before this happened. So I'm still remembering that and remembering that example. And I didn't want to have to tell the story of why some firefighter fell out of a fire truck that I was in charge of. So for me, the safety of the human beings, I mean, back to the point about, removing barriers, it's removing barriers and creating as safe an environment as possible for them to do their job, whatever that means. Whatever that means. Make it safe for people and they'll do great things.
So why don't 100% of firefighters wear their seatbelt in 2025? That drives it continue that continues to drive Dr. Clark crazy. Crazy. Okay? And I agree. When you talk about, you know, barriers, putting them up as opposed to removing them, well, and again, I'm not a psychologist, okay, but I sure do spend a lot of time talking to them, okay? A lot of times people put up those barriers so to protect themselves from the negative, okay? God, I can't let my bosses know that I'm having an issue, okay? Or, I want them to think everything is hunky dory right here, you know, and again, another analogy that I use when I talk to fire chiefs and firefighters is, okay, do you provide EMS in your fire department? They say, yeah. I said, who calls the shots? Our operational medical director. Exactly. Your fire chief doesn't determine drug dosages or whether cricothyroidotomy is a procedure we should be doing, or should we backboard patients all the time, or none of those decisions are made by a fire chief. I mentioned earlier, one of my staff assignments was as EMS director for our department, is when we really first started getting into, we had EMT was entry level training that we provided, but it was in the late 90s that we first got into, okay, we're standing up an EMS division because we need to do a better job, and we hired our first operational medical director, okay? And for about the first 6 months, some of the most enjoyable conversations I ever had, enjoyable in quotation marks, were with my deputy chief of operations, who didn't agree with what the OMD wanted to do. And I said, but fortunately I had communications training that told me, don't change the message, just keep communicating the same message. Same message, because it takes most people about 25 times before it sinks in. And my message was, Chief, you don't get to decide the what we do. The only thing you get to decide is, how do we do it? How do we staff? How do we equip? What training do we provide? Okay, etc. But it's Dr. Hemsley, who was our first OMD. It's Dr. Hemsley who determines what those, because guess what? They're operating under his license.
His license.
Okay?
That's right. That's right.
His license. And if one of those paramedics out there does something because you told him to do it and it wasn't right, guess what? It ain't going to come back on you. Okay? Any more than if one of our fire trucks has a wreck because it didn't have any brakes, that ain't going to come back on Dr. Hemsley. That's going to come back on you, because you're the person who determines, how do we do it? How do we do it? And I think that's where we have to get to when it comes to this bridging between the psychology community and the fire service community is, okay, I'm not going to tell you how to go about doing it, but these are the whats. These are the whats that we need to work on. Now, how do we work together to integrate the whats with the hows? Okay? You know, people real quickly, I put together this presentation that I work with firefighters to explain, and psychologists, okay? Hazmat training for firefighters, right? Every firefighter gets trained to awareness and operations level hazmat response, right? And what's part of that is knowing what is your scope of practice, right? Okay? And particularly when you get to that operations level, you got to constantly reinforce that your structural PPE is not chemical protective clothing. You do not ever come in contact with the product. Okay? Well, I took that scenario, right? And technicians, right? Those are firefighters who want to get to the point where they can do more than dam, dike, and divert, right? Right? And when it comes to our hazmat teams, that's who most of the worker bees are. Technicians, right? Specialists. Those are the firefighters. Those are the technicians now who say, you know what? I want to be able to address the bigger picture, whether it's being in command of a hazmat incident, whether it's being part of, an emergency operations plan where we got a hazmat problem and a natural disaster and all that stuff, okay? Over here on the mental health side, right? You got peer support, right? Peer support. That's like operations level. All right. We teach those peer support team members how to recognize that there may be an issue, that this may have had an impact on these people. Let's touch base with them. Let's find out where they're at, how they're doing, etc. Okay. The next step up on psychology is the master's level clinicians, which there are vastly more of them, just like there are more technicians over here, right? They're the ones who can do more than dam, dike, and divert, right? And the important thing that the peer support team, they need to recognize, when am I getting ready to go outside of my scope of practice? When am I suddenly not damming, diking, and diverting, but actively getting, can't go there, okay? So over here, we got your master's level clinicians. And then, just like over here, we have specialists, you got psychologists, okay? And psychologists, in their academic training, are trained in 4 different domains: assessment, intervention, industrial and organizational psychology, and operational psychology. Okay? Assessments, whether it's pre-employment psychological assessments, assessing a firefighter who's looking to return to duty after they've had a mental health issue, or disability. This person, we just, it's not in their best interest or our best interest to bring them back to work, because they're going to need some serious attention. Obviously, intervention. We're all familiar with what intervention involves, right? Counseling and therapy and so forth, right? Industrial and organizational psychologist, and Andrew Holter is a rock star when it comes to this stuff.
Yes. Well, I will say one of my former college students. I didn't know
Yeah,
he's
yeah. Andrew
proud
is a
of him.
rock
Yeah.
star when it comes to this stuff. Okay, and that's the domain of psychology that really starts speaking to those human factors, and what are we doing as an organization, and how are we treating people, and and you know what, DEI is not a dirty word to me, okay, because that's organizational psychology right there. You can talk all day long about bringing more women and more people of color and more people of different ethnic backgrounds into, but if you're not prepared to integrate them into and give them the voice to say, I don't like that, or I don't.
I'll take that. I'll take it even a little further than that. If you're not willing, so everything that I do for me is perfect for me, which is why I do it that way. But if I'm going to do something with Robert, then we, not just me, we need to have conversation about what's going to be best for us. And too often it doesn't. It's like, well, we do it this way and you have to become like us. No, we are going to do this. We have to become a little bit like each other. So not only should I not have to necessarily, now I'm going to have to conform to some things, but so will you. Why is it that I have to do all the changing? I recall when when I started with the Seattle Fire Department, the senior woman firefighter had been on the job for 5 years. So we were still having conversation about women having to cut their hair. Why? Because somebody thought that was a good idea. They made up all kinds of excuses to back it up. But the reality was, it really had nothing to do with doing the job. Nothing whatsoever. It was, this is the way we do it, all the guys. This is the way it's safe for us. It works for us. And you have to conform, as opposed to, but you invited new and different people. Why don't we come up with a different way of doing it? It's not better or worse. It's just different.
Why you have to cut your hair? Because they won't let me have a beard.
right.
But you and I both know the difference. This is a safety issue. Your face piece, you'll not pass a fit test, right? But with the hair, we got a protective hood. If it's good enough to protect my noggin, it should be good enough to protect my hair.
That's
okay?
Exactly right.
Okay?
Exactly right.
And
exactly
the,
right.
The fourth domain, operations, is the one that really starts to get into that human factor stuff. Okay? And here again, I tell firefighters all the time, I say, name me a professional athlete or major college athlete that doesn't have a sports psychologist. I said, I'll never forget, I heard an interview one time with Tom Brady, right? And he was talking about how much his psychologist had helped him get, particularly when he first, and he was talking about when he first got the starting job, right? He's replacing Drew Bledsoe, right? It's like, and the reporter asked him, so Tom, what does this guy do for you? He says, he don't do a damn thing about teaching me how to throw a football better, or how to recognize a blitz, or he helps me get out of my way. He helps me with the 6 inches between my ears. Okay? And if I was to say the biggest thing that this guy has helped me do is slow the game down. slow the game down. He said, when I first started working with him, he said, running a 2-minute drill scared the hell out of me. He said, but now I'm the guy. I'm the guy who controls everything else that happens, right? So if I can slow it down and I can make better decisions because I'm seeing the big picture, guess what? Everybody else is going to be doing the same thing because they're going to go, Tom's got it together. I got to have it together. And I think that when we look at where, and Jamie Richard is another one of my colleagues up in Ontario, Canada. And Jamie is big time firefighter, psychology guy, as I like to refer to, switch hitter in our business, right? But that's his shtick. This is a field, this is the domain of psychology that can help us recognize the risk that's not going to result in a good outcome unless I do something different in between. How beneficial would it be if we could teach all of our firefighters and our officers how to slow the game down? How to slow the game, but there again, to quote Dr. Clark, that's where we're fighting against that firefighter DNA. Fast, close, and wet. Fast, close, and wet. Yes, that was important when you were a bucket brigade guy back in the 1680s, okay? When you could only throw a bucket of water 5 feet, right? And just getting there, if you didn't get there fast, the whole town's going down, right? But we're so much better than that. We're so much better than that. And if
should be.
and if we got a lot better at fire prevention, we'd be even better at what we're doing. All right? If we advocated for automatic fire protection instead of letting the building industry run roughshod over us, okay? We wouldn't have firefighters dying in commercial structures. Why is that even happening? There have been sprinklers in commercial buildings since the 1880s. Okay? And why are we still letting the building industry dictate, what are we at now? 34 states that have outlawed residential sprinkler ordinances? This is crazy.
Well, but I'll tell you, in those places where that is the case, then it does go back to the individual. So if that's the way that the industry and the elected officials want to go, why is it that we aren't being honest with the general public and telling them that as long as you leave that hazard in place, that risk in place, there's only so much. You could have a fire station on, every corner, and it's not going to matter.
Because that goes back to the psychological safety that doesn't exist between the elected officials and the fire officials. Okay? In those communities where that psychological safety does exist, that's where you got Maryland that has residential fire sprinklers in all new residential construction. Right? But there again, and that's why I say that there are so many tools in that psychology toolbox that can help make us better at so many different things that we do, right? How are you going to communicate effectively with people who know nothing about the problem, okay, if you don't understand where they're coming from?
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
Because nobody likes being preached to. Okay?
That's right.
And especially if your message is coming across that I know you don't, so you should listen to me.
Yeah, and again, the reality is for those who are going to serve in public capacities, it doesn't make the public wrong because that's the decision that they make. It's not that they're wrong. The idea is, how do you clarify for them, here's the consequence of that decision, and then here's what we're going to do. Because I'll tell you this, and we'll wrap it up here. I still don't believe that there is a single structure built any place in this country that is more important than the life of a firefighter. It isn't. You decided not to sprinkle it. That's okay. You decided to store this stuff. That's also okay. But what we're not going to do is take this other human being who you've asked to serve this community to exchange their life for your stuff. That's not a risk I'm personally willing to take. I wouldn't advise anybody to take it. Decisions have consequences, and in this case, the consequence is going to be on you because you didn't. We tried to help you. We tried to tell you. We tried to get you to do the prevention stuff you didn't want to. Now the consequence is yours because if I accept it now, that's a hazard I now have to deal with. And I've got a family too. I've got a community to go back as well. And it's just not fair to really do it that way. So as we wrap our conversation, I'd like you to share with people who want to know more about the association, and they also may want to know more about you. You got a lot of stuff to talk about in terms of this bridge between the fire service and psychology. So talk a little bit about how they can find out more about the association and how they get in contact with you if they desire to.
First things first, our website is Fire Psychology, all one word, all lowercase, .org. Okay? And we are already in the planning stages for our next national conference, which will be in Pearland, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston, and that's where we will gather as we did in our last conference was in Washington D.C. last October. We had about 150 firefighters, fire chiefs, psychologists, master's level clinicians. I think we had a total of 11 outstanding presentations. And I will tell you this, if you come to our conference, you are not going to fall asleep in a presentation because we tell our presenters right up front, you got 59 minutes. Okay? And I will give you all 59 minutes because when I introduce you, it's not going to be this, I'm going to say, and now our next speaker is going to be David Daniels, and he's with such and such, and his presentation today, well, hell, he's going to tell you about it. Dave Daniels, okay? As a matter of fact, it was in Atlanta in 2023. We had our conference in Atlanta on the campus of Georgia Tech. And that was my first, actually, that was our first in-person conference after COVID. And that was my first as the MC for the thing, right? And second presentation of the morning, right? The good presentation, okay? But the presenter was going and going and going. And when I got to 59 minutes, I walked up on stage, I put my arm around and said, what a great presentation. How about a big hand for da-da-da-da-da-da? And off we went, right? So her seat was at one of the tables towards the back of the room, right? Well, the fourth presentation that morning, starting to run long, right? And so I'm walking up the side of the room there, and I make eye contact with her, and she's going, go get him.
Yeah.
Nobody else went over. And so, I mean, we tell our presenters that up front, right? And we will be making we got our call for presentations is out right now, and we'll start evaluating those after we close on May 2nd. And we will give our presenters that full briefing. You know, we're going to give you 59 solid minutes. Okay? 59 solid minutes. Because that's one of the things we've come to pride ourselves on is 10, maybe 11 really good presentations where you're going to learn something, but more importantly, you're going to make a new contact. You're going to make a contact that you can get in touch with and learn more, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of view our presentations as icebreakers and networking opportunities. So we'll be in Pearland, Texas, October 9th through 10th. And included in your registration fee is we're going to have a Texas-style barbecue. Got to have food in Texas, right? As far as getting in contact with me, and all the details about the conference are on the website. We got a conference page there, all that. People can get in touch with me. My email address is all lowercase, Chief Avsec, AVSEC, at firepsychology.org. And you can also look me up on LinkedIn. Yep, part of the LinkedIn community there.
Absolutely.
David, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's been long overdue for me and you to have face-to-face conversation, I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been an admirer of your work at a distance for quite a while, and it is good to have this opportunity to share. And I appreciate the work that you're doing to build
Which
this
is all
bridge.
pro bono,
Because
by the way.
I understand. I do a bit of that myself. So, but you know what? I think money and all of our other resources are only an issue in the absence of value. So when there's value, it's something we do because we care, and it's good to have folks like yourself that care about this, because I do believe that the United States is going to catch up eventually on this issue. We are. And the only way we're going to catch up, though, we have to have voices in each and every one of these industries that are talking about, look, these are human beings. What's going on in the 6 inches between their ears or however many other inches there are, is really important. And if we could solve and address some of that, a lot of our other issues will be addressed. So again, thanks very much. And if you're watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something you've heard will bring you back to a future episode. Previous episodes of the podcast can be found at psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. You can watch, like, subscribe, and share the podcast on the Flourish DX YouTube page. And please do join the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting and becoming a subscriber on LinkedIn. So until next time, stay tuned and look out for the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Tune in each week for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.